Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here. It is Tuesday, December 12th, 2023. I'm Jonathan Broadbent and I'm your host of UnWoke.Academy. Today, let's talk donuts, restaurants, hardware stores, tailors, local small business. Just think in general. I don't know about where you live, but near me, there's a donut shop that we just rave about. I think it's spectacular. They make delicious donuts. Every once in a while, I'll splurge. I'll sacrifice the diet and go into this local donut shop, and everything's wonderful. Everything there is spectacular. And so I've got sort of this running side joke. They all know me there. I go in and chat with the folks working behind the counter. They've got this massive display of delicious things, and I tend to go in and I'll just look at it all and say yes, yes, please. And they chuckle, and then I'll just buy a couple of donuts. So my reason for bringing these things up is hopefully you've got some small business near you, whatever category it is, a hardware store that's just some local, not a small chain, maybe a regional or just a one-off. Those are kind of a dying breed, but just something that is a local small business that you care about. And I want you to picture that small business as we talk about today's conversation, which is funding. So, at a high level, think of it this way. You have probably access to a 401k, maybe an IRA. You have investment somewhere. If you don't, you should, or you should be working toward creating an environment where you're able to invest some money. When you do, let's talk about what that investment looks like. So historically, and what you probably have right now, if you have a 401k plan, is you've got a list of mutual funds. And you've heard me talk at length about some of the problems that we see with those mutual funds. They tend to overall generally lean very far left. And yes, we are continuing to do a lot of scouting and conversations and reporting on those managers and mutual funds and things like them that don't lean left, but they're kind of few and far between. The ones that are reliably focused either just middle of the road and dissecting and eliminating the politics entirely, getting rid of, in other words, all the woke-a-doodle far left stuff that's opaque and murky and we can't really even define it. And there are some that lean right that have missions and causes. They'll have a purpose behind them, like they're pro-life or something. And that's fine for people that might want that. The nice thing there, as opposed to the far left, is it can be defined. You can see actually how they articulate their value proposition. So instead of using sort of vague, ambiguous terms like ESG as the left uses, the right will specifically say that they're pro Second Amendment, for instance. And then you can see them purchasing munitions and firearms companies and supporting those types of companies, et cetera. And I've talked about that at length at UnWoke, the difference between those two sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. But let's face it, most people, for the most part, are kind of middle of the road and they just don't want the politics in their portfolio. And that's fine. I call that shareholder first investing. But let's drill down a little bit into what that actually looks like and a vision that I have for something that represents new opportunity and a new type of growth market that I think will resonate. I really hope that it does. So as we put together a bunch of different difficult pieces in society right now, we have an environment, unfortunately, where banking regulation has just really crushed small local community banks. And somebody actually last night, I was a guest on a radio program, and the host mentioned something. I think the number was 800 or 900. The trivia question that was asked of me, knowing that I work in finance, I was asked which president led to regulations that closed, and I think it was 800 or maybe 900 regional banks. And I thought for a moment and guessed Obama, and I was right. According to this host, during the Obama era, 800 or 900 regional local banks closed, and we're seeing a lot more close now And the more you get this tightening of regulations, and of course it's pitched as helpful and they're trying to weed out the bad guys and blah, 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 whatever sort of lip service they give to the whole prospect of closing the regional local banks. Ultimately, what we end up with is big, mega, globalist, ultra multinational, I don't know a better term to use than globalist banks. And the globalist banks are generally not prone to lend to small business. They just don't do it. They're not interested in it because there's big money to be made in continuing to try and winnow down into just a select few companies and have them sort of become these global suppliers. I call it global communism. And actually, openly, some big multinational investment managers and banks advocate for that. They would very much like that because they will make tons of money with very little effort and very little risk. Because if there's one supplier of fill in the blank, your the hardware supplies that you buy, the tools that you go and buy, if there's one supplier, then they don't have to go and run any risk supporting the development of some new supplier. Well, that doesn't really suit we the people very well. And by the way, once again, I'm going to mention that a lot of what I discuss tends to be hyper local in context, but is applicable everywhere. In any state and any country. It really is and should be applied all across the world. So let's put that environment of sort of collapsing or crushed local community banks into the context of how we invest our money. So let's imagine you have a 401k plan or IRA or some other means of investing, and you're putting money in small increments. I'm just going to use 401k as an example. And if you're a teacher or hospital worker or nonprofit staff, that would be a 403b. Whatever it is, whatever the vehicle, you're then buying typically something like a mutual fund. Mutual funds are the most commonly used, but they're not the only game out there. That mutual fund then goes out and buys companies. So they'll build a portfolio of different investments for you. And there's kind of a blessing and a curse to that. They're saving you the effort of having to do any research on your own and figure out what it is that you would like to buy and own in your portfolio. But in exchange for that, there's an ongoing fee that never goes away. They're charging a fee. Sometimes there's an upfront fee and then an ongoing annual maintenance fee for their advice and for the buying and selling. And then sometimes on the back end, if you get out when you leave, sometimes there's a charge there as well. So putting all that aside for a moment, and the fee structure, which can be a little bit complicated, I admit, let's look at what you're actually buying. So we've seen, and I continue to drill down into these mutual funds, and we're looking at what they're actually invested in, and it's horrible, bad stuff. If you believe in Judeo-Christian Western values, if you believe in capitalism, if you believe in free enterprise and open free markets, most of the investments that we're finding in these big multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar investment managers is not good stuff. It's all the usual suspects over and over and over again. So you may find a whole bunch of different mutual funds in a lineup in your 401k plan, and you get a menu here. You choose from these 15 different mutual funds, etc. But a lot of them have massive overlap. So you may find 6 out of the 10 or 12 out of the 15 are all buying the same 6 stocks, and then a few others that make them slightly different. That's not great. So yes, it is a reasonable prospect, and we continue to talk to all these different small managers out there, hoping that we find some, and we'll continue to report on the ones that have all the right ingredients. We're looking for several things. We're looking for track record. We'd like a manager that's been around for a while so we can see their capability, that they're good and sufficient. We're looking at the actual investments. So if they say something like that they're shareholder first or use some terminology that's designed maybe to fool somebody like me or an average investor. We want to drill down and make sure they're actually doing what they say they're going to be doing. And we also want to see their performance, how well they've been doing, what it is they say that they're going to be doing. And those are great. Those are all well and good. But what if there are two other possibilities for you to be investing in? One is, don't discount the idea of buying and holding some of your own portfolio of individual stocks. It was very common for a lot of years, and a lot of people did very well in the markets by building a portfolio of actual stocks. That cuts out the mutual fund. Those mutual funds, they won't be happy with that idea, but you can do that in many, many circumstances, including 401k. So your 401k, this is kind of a side note, but look into something called a self-directed brokerage account, or sometimes it's referred to as a self-directed brokerage window. That is an account within your 401k that allows you to purchase and hold stocks and bonds, individual issues. That cuts out the whole mutual fund thing. It cuts out the whole equation of somebody charging an ongoing fee for them to sit on and manage those investments. And it be aware it will have a transaction cost, but those are recently, over the past 15 years, have come down a lot and have become very, very reasonable. So it's really worth the comparison to look at the difference between going with one of those mutual funds, especially if you've got a whole bunch of really far left woke mutual funds that are your only option, versus either finding or asking your employer to gain access to that self-directed brokerage account where you can make those choices yourself. So that's a second option. But I want to drill down a little bit into an idea that we're working on really hard right now at UnWoke. We're working with legislators and lawyers and accounting firms and everybody who will talk to us about the prospect of building vehicles for investors to invest in local businesses near you. So the concept, it looks like this. It would be seed money to start and fund and help nurture local businesses near you. Whatever it is that you thought of earlier when I asked you to think of some local business, that business and ones like it, they need capital, they need cash flow, especially at startup. So now put those pieces together. We have those collapsing, crushed, closing local banks with a harder and harder environment for local businesses to find capital that they desperately need in order to buy inventory, buy the machines and tools, and hire people and rent a facility or build one to operate their business. So if we put those together, it's a perfect scenario and a perfect sort of a feeder fund for people to gain access to growing markets. I'm just going to put it simply that way. So yes, it is true that there is a prospect that some of those small businesses may not survive. And hopefully they get all the right ingredients and they do well and they thrive. There is that prospect that they might close. And if they do, there's the potential for loss there. However, a well-designed portfolio is going to take that into account. And so what we want to do is create these funds that invest in lots and lots of small businesses. And so you've probably heard me use the expression in the past, all that money has been made by the time it gets to Wall Street. I'm going to say that again because that's a key critical phrase to keep in mind. In my world in finance, we say it all the time. It's kind of a known truth. By the time it gets to Wall Street, all the money has been made. And what that basically means, and you see it on TV all the time with these billionaire, ultra wealthy individuals who will take some of their money and invest it in buying parts of startup. If they see a startup that they really like, they try and lowball, spend as little as possible to gain a huge chunk of that company, because they know if that company does well, they can make massive money. way more than you make once that company has already gone through all of its growth phase and it's established itself. And then it goes onto the market and gets listed on something like New York Stock Exchange or one of those exchange um, um, marketplaces, one of the New York Stock Exchange, Chicago Board of Options Exchange, et cetera, one of those. So what if, in addition to taking money away from those woke managers who are using mutual funds to funnel your money into far left woke companies and causes, we take that out and then explore those two options. Or it's actually, excuse me, that's three. One would be our reporting back that we're finding unwoke managers, mutual funds, and things like them as options for you to go to better invest your money. Uh, as a second option, we have those self-directed brokerage accounts where we can help guide you on individual stocks, the companies that are non-woke. Remember, one of the key ingredients here, we're in the process of acquiring leadership of a company called Second Vote. You've heard me talk about that. They have a 12-year track record of weighing companies on what I call the 6 pillars of freedom. You can look up secondvote.com. You can see a description of what they are and their background, and you can see where they do well and where some of these companies fail. You can we can explore options to build portfolios of investments in those companies, the ones that we know are not woke, that are doing well relative to respecting our freedoms and liberties. That makes a whole lot of sense. But then that third one, it's really intriguing. And as I talk to more and more people in finance and banking and legal and accounting firms, there's growing appetite and interest to find that and build it in a way that's meaningful, that represents an alternative to those closing local banks. And from your perspective, my friends, imagine this. Imagine a scenario where you know that you are voting your values, as we like to say, which means taking your money out of those far left companies and causes, getting out of things like that you may not approve of. Anheuser-Busch is an example. They're the parent company of Bud Light. Target has done some really questionable things recently. By the way, side note, in some of my previous recordings, I have talked about what leads to that, the what's called the corporate equity index. That's the club with which these mega corporations are beaten in order to beat them into submission and make them do self-harm to their own brand. We're seeing it with Disney. GM and Ford have done some stuff recently. It's very questionable, and people just don't seem to like. The reason for that is that corporate equity index. But imagine an environment where you don't have to worry about that anymore. You know that you've dissected that cancerous stuff out of your portfolio. You've jettisoned that stuff and are investing more wisely. And maybe what it looks like, and I think it makes a lot of sense to consider a combination of those different ingredients. So there are some managers that we're finding. I've talked to several. I've been reporting on some of the managers who are not far left woke and that are doing the right things for those businesses that they invest in, and they have their sights set on everything that we have established as traditional norms in the financial world, and not the smoke and mirrors virtue signaling of the woke left. And then imagine, in addition to some of those managers, having access to that startup seed money in a whole bunch of big array of small businesses. There could come a time when this grows and flourishes, imagine a time in your future as you go around your community shopping and you stop at that local donut store and get some pastries, and you stop in the hardware store and pick up some things for a project at home, or you drop off your dry cleaning or something. Imagine an environment where you have a little bit of ownership in those companies. And that's just it is a great simpatico. It's a great environment where you can actually see the fruits of your investment, and it's seed money for those small businesses. And it's a way for us, we the people, to thumb our nose at the far left who are crushing small regional banks. And then, of course, that third ingredient does take a little bit of work, but it's worth it to build a portfolio of your own investments. So instead of that manager, like looking at your statement every once in a while and seeing that you've got some BlackRock fund who are for sure, in my estimation, loading your money into far left companies and causes. Imagine a different environment where you open up your statement from your 401k or IRA or otherwise, and you can see a great list of companies that you can be proud to own. And if one of those companies does fold and they go woke, you can just sell off that one company, get rid of it, and feel happy and feel comfortable, feel confident and excited about the investments that you have. That can happen with just a little bit of effort and awareness. By the way, if you do have questions, email or just find me on social media, send them directly, or call in. We'd be happy to talk to you. We'll include it in a future session if it seems fairly universal. But we want to help you do a deep dive into how you're investing, where your money is going, and make sure that you're not making bad choices that fund the companies, the woke left companies that seem to hate us. I'm Jonathan Broadbent, your host of UnWoke.Academy. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next exciting episode.